You've spent decades shaping yourself for others, pleasing, performing, bending to expectations. Maybe it made life easier, maybe it got you approval, but now it haunts you. Every compromise, every master motion, every yes you offered when your soul whispered no is still there. And at 60 or beyond, you realize something uncomfortable. Love was never something to earn. It was never currency. You've been running after a lie. You look at the people around you and wonder why connection feels shallow, why closeness seems temporary, why desire feels hollow. It isn't because you are too old. It is because you have invested your life in the wrong pursuit. You traded authenticity for acceptance, truth for comfort, and now intimacy meets you with a harsh mirror. Another person does not arrive to reward your efforts, they arrive to expose the parts of yourself you refuse to see. At this age, continuing to beg, to adjust, to perform, only deepens the gap. You cannot summon real connection with charm, obligation, or compliance. Love after 60 responds to one thing alone: the courage to stand unflinching in your truth. It demands you confront your regrets, acknowledge your failures, and accept the parts of yourself you denied for decades. This is the brutal reality. If you keep pleading for affection, if you continue to mold yourself for others, you will never be seen. Real intimacy comes not to those who earn it, it comes to those who have stopped running from themselves. Many people spend their lives believing that love can be earned, that if they are helpful enough, charming enough, or attentive enough, someone will finally see them, accept them, and stay. For decades you may have followed this logic without questioning it. You learn to bend, to compromise, to silence parts of yourself in order to maintain connection. You believe that if you performed well enough, if you played your role convincingly, affection and validation would follow. And for a while, it may have worked. People smiled, relationships functioned, life moved forward. But as you age, this strategy begins to fail. After 60, the old tricks no longer hold the same power. Energy fades, patience diminishes, and the masks you wore for decades start to feel heavy. The charm that once opened doors now rings hollow. Effort without truth cannot sustain closeness. Intimacy stops responding to performance and begins responding only to authenticity. What you may have thought was love was often not love at all, but compliance, convenience, or expectation. The people you thought you earned affection from were engaging with a version of you that never existed fully, a crafted self designed to be acceptable and safe. Now, at this stage of life, the world demands a different currency. It does not reward compliance or pleasing. Connection arrives only when you are willing to show yourself without pretense. It is frightening because it exposes flaws, failures, and vulnerabilities you may have spent a lifetime hiding. But this exposure is also liberating. Love that emerges at this age is raw, unfiltered, and transformative. It cannot be manipulated or bargained for. The only way to be part of it is to stop performing and to let yourself be seen as you truly are, stripped of the illusions and compromises that once defined your relationships. For decades, many people live under the assumption that relationships are built on effort alone, that if they work hard enough, give enough, or sacrifice enough, love will follow. You may have spent years molding yourself to fit expectations, adjusting your desires to accommodate others, or silencing your truths to maintain peace. Perhaps it felt necessary, even wise. It kept the connection alive, avoided conflict, and made life seem manageable. But this strategy is fundamentally flawed. Pleasing others can never replace authenticity, and the longer you rely on it, the further you drift from real intimacy. As you move past 60, the consequences of this lifelong pattern become unavoidable. Energy wanes, patience thins, and the layers of performance that once protected you begin to feel heavy and hollow. The gestures and compromises that previously secured attention now fall flat. People may respond out of habit, politeness, or convenience, but the depth you longed for remains absent. What you realize now is that effort alone was never enough. True connection does not arrive because you were agreeable, accommodating, or predictable. It arrives only when you have the courage to reveal yourself fully. This is why many older adults feel disillusioned, frustrated, or lonely. They are still engaging with the world as they always have, using the same strategies that worked in youth, but the world no longer responds in the same way. Intimacy after 60 demands truth and presence. It demands that you take responsibility for the self you have neglected, confront the compromises you made, and face the parts of yourself you silenced. Only by abandoning the habitual need to please can you create space for real relationships, connections that are not transactional, not dependent on performance, but rooted in honesty and mutual recognition. At this stage, the distinction becomes clear: the relationships you earn through effort alone are shallow, temporary, and unfulfilling, while those that emerge from authenticity are enduring, transformative, and rare. At this stage of life, intimacy stops responding to effort, charm, or obligation. After 60, people can no longer be satisfied by gestures, compliance, or appearances alone. The masks you wore for decades, the compromises you made to keep peace or gain approval, begin to fail. What remains is the raw, unfiltered self you hid even from yourself, and anyone seeking closeness now encounters that truth immediately. Many older adults enter relationships expecting comfort, stability, or relief from loneliness, but the reality is harsher. Another person is not arriving to fill gaps, to fix what was neglected, or to reward your efforts. They arrive to reflect back the unresolved parts of yourself, the regrets, bitterness, insecurities, and fears you postponed confronting. Small conflicts feel magnified because they touch long-buried wounds, and emotional reactions often appear excessive because they carry decades of unprocessed pain. This is why late-life relationships fail so often. It is not about timing, energy, or desire. It is about whether you have done the inner work to meet connection honestly. Without self-reflection, without acknowledgement of failures and compromises, intimacy feels threatening rather than comforting. It demands responsibility, accountability, and courage, the very qualities most were never trained to practice in their pursuit of approval and acceptance. When these capacities are absent, connection collapses, and withdrawal feels like relief, reinforcing the illusion that love is impossible after 60. As you grow older, solitude often feels safer than intimacy. Not because you no longer crave connection, but because being seen now carries consequences that youth could absorb. In earlier years, mistakes, misunderstandings, and emotional exposure could be smoothed over with charm, distraction, or time. Now every interaction reveals not just who you are, but the parts of yourself you avoided confronting for decades. Silence becomes a shield, and distance feels like protection. When someone attempts closeness, they do not meet the mask you perfected, they meet the raw, unedited self. Every regret, every compromise, every unresolved grievance becomes visible. The experience is unsettling because it forces recognition of the life you lived through avoidance, not honesty. Many retreat into isolation and justify it with words like independence, wisdom, or peace, but beneath these labels sits fear: fear of exposure, fear of being judged, fear of facing truths long denied. Solitude offers control. It eliminates confrontation, disappointment, and accountability, yet the cost is stagnation. Without another presence to reflect your inner world, self-deception grows easier. Patterns go untested, excuses go unchallenged, and the parts of yourself that require reckoning remain dormant. True intimacy at this stage demands more than desire. It demands honesty, courage, and the willingness to be witnessed fully, even when that sight is uncomfortable, unflinching, and relentless. At this point in life, seeking love through pleasing or performance becomes futile. After 60, no amount of charm, compliance, or sacrifice can create real intimacy. People often enter relationships hoping for comfort, reassurance, or validation, but the truth is harsh. Another person cannot fill the gaps you have ignored within yourself. Late-life intimacy exposes what you have avoided, the regrets you never faced, the compromises you accepted, and the parts of yourself you silenced to survive. Responsibility becomes unavoidable. You must confront your emotions without hiding, acknowledge the life you lived without excuses, and face your failures without deflection. Relationships now act as mirrors, reflecting the truths you spent decades avoiding. If you continue to perform, to mold yourself to fit another's expectations, intimacy collapses under the weight of illusion. Withdrawal feels easier, safer, and more comfortable, but it is only avoidance in disguise. The capacity for connection depends on inner work. You must practice honesty, self-reflection, and accountability, and relinquish the need to control or manipulate affection. Only those willing to stand unflinching in their truth can experience meaningful relationships at this age. Love does not come to those who earn it through effort. It comes to those who stop pleading, stop performing, and finally allow themselves to be fully seen, stripped of pretense, and prepared to meet reality without compromise.